And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Voice Lessons from Thursday Night Live. I am your host, Mike Elson, founder of Voice Lessons. And with me, I have Dr. Matthew Edwards. Matt, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we've got a good show prepared for you guys. I think we had a couple summer weeks off, so a couple people were wondering where we were. Well, it was summertime, so we were getting organized for this year. So this season, we're jumping back into some live Q&As from real singers like you out there, and we're going to jump into our first question. This question comes from Metropoli. He writes in, Belter dance and move on stage. So belters dance moving on stage. How should belters sing and dance simultaneously without damaging their voices?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's one I get asked pretty frequently. So I was happy to see it come in here. I thought we could definitely talk about this a lot this evening. So the problem is it starts with the way the dancers are trained. And so dancers are trained to keep themselves upright by engaging their abdominal wall. And so that feeling of contraction between that xiphoid process, which is underneath the rib cage and all the way down to your pelvic bone, that's going to be always tight. And so the first thing you have to understand is that, because that impacts the way that they can even breathe, right? If they're trying to dance and sing and you want them to relax their abdominal wall, that literally could throw everything off so that they can't dance. So it's just not going to happen. And so when you just look at it and go, they can't do that, you have to then figure out what other way can they control respiration, right? So then we just got to think, well, what's the whole point of controlling respiration? Well, usually if you're singing and dancing, it's short bursts of sound. It's not long legato lines. So the purpose of respiratory control there is to make sure you got enough air in your lungs and you use it, efficiently. And that can be done with the rib cage. So the first step of being able to do this without damaging your voices is to really focus on lateral expansion and maintaining that expansion. So there's been many studies done on body types and breathing. And what we know is that people who have a looser abdominal wall, maybe are more round in the abdominal section, are going to see more abdominal expansion. But people who are really muscular are not going to see a lot of abdominal expansion, and therefore the lungs end up expanding more laterally and maybe even a little bit vertically. Remember that the lungs come actually all the way up to here, to our collarbones. We often forget this. So seeing expansion right under this space, that's not a bad thing. That's just the upper part of your lung filling up. The bad thing is when you start using your shoulder muscles to act as muscles of inspiration. So if you're going, and you're sucking everything up like that, that is bad. Okay? And that we don't want. But some feeling of expansion here and in the back underneath of your scapula, because again, that's where your rib cage is, and your lungs are there too. That's okay. They can then maintain that feeling of expansion up there in what almost ends up being a cone shape, right? Because you're going from the middle part of the ribs and then going up towards the top. And you're just going to try to keep those external intercostal muscles, the muscles in between your ribs, you're going to try to keep them engaged as you release air. And a lot of us probably did this exercise at some point where you would breathe in, so you can try to keep your rib cage out. Now, we had Dr. Kari Reagan on the show a couple months ago, and she made a great point about this. We have to be careful that maintaining expansion does not become rigidity, right? It's not supposed to be tense resisting of the clap. It's rather supposed to be buoyancy. And buoyancy means you don't just let the thing sink, but you allow it to bounce a little bit. As you release air, they may come in a little, but then they're going to flex back out until they finally come into the resting position. Then you inhale and they expand again, and they buoyantly move until you inhale again, and then you keep repeating that process. We just want to keep that buoyancy up. And that's going to give the dancer enough room to make it through their phrases. Now, there's something, though, that happens even before they're in a performance situation, and that's going to make a huge impact. And that's what is happening when they're learning the choreography. Okay, so a lot of times we don't address this issue until they've already learned the choreography, and then we're trying to fix the voice. But when they're doing their memorization, we can have them actually memorize the places in their choreography where they breathe, right? Because they could be doing a series of turns and then they reach, and in that reach, they have a 2 count. And that 2 count, they can inhale and they can get the rib cage up, and then they can go into the next spot until they do like some kick and then another break of a pose while somebody else on the other side of the stage does something. They breathe in, get a good inhale, and then they move into the next, right? So they want to be thinking about where those places are. As they're learning the singing, then they're going to start to find out where those places line up well and where they don't. And then they're going to have to compensate as needed. But they will at least have a consistency of inhalation throughout the choreography if they do that process. So then the next thing that they need to do, of course, is to combine those two things. And that means practice outside of dance time. And some dancers are really good about this, a lot aren't. A lot just figure, oh, I'll go and just kind of think about the choreography, maybe just kind of mock it out so I know that I've memorized it and then I'll do it full out in rehearsal. That's a bad idea for singers. Singers need to find an open space where they can do the full out choreography and practice singing. And just like we troubleshoot technical spots where we, mark on measure 34 to 37, we have an issue with a high note, and the same as in 60 to 65. They need to then figure out a notation system for themselves in their music to say, this dance move is giving me a breathing problem right here. And then they need to try to figure out between their teacher and their choreographer how to deal with that, or the music director, right? And again, this is just actually thinking about it will usually solve the problems. And then the final thing is that if you find out that their heart rate as it gets up, that starts to make them breathe faster. That's normal, and that's part of our fight or flight instinct. But as they're battling that sensation to keep inhaling and the heart's racing, again, if they're only dealing with that in the moment, that's going to be a problem. So what I often do is have them do a set of jumping jacks until they get their heart rate up, and then start vocalizing or singing parts of their song. Then if their heart rate comes down, do a set of jumping jacks or run in place for a minute, get your heart rate up, and then practice that breath movement work. And I find that, again, is giving them a way to drill and train the respiratory system to deal with that elevated heart rate, which again will then translate over into the dance. So let's just recap, because we've thrown it out in several different ways. You have to address this through the learning process of the choreography and through some specific technical adjustments with the voice. So the technical adjustments with the voice is shifting from an abdominal mindset on respiratory control to a more lateral rib cage based approach. And this is going to be fine because in dance numbers, there are rarely ever long legato lines. The abdominal wall is usually really important for that, not usually an issue. You also have to remember they're mic'd, and when they're mic'd in a dance number, they have this compression dialed in, which means that the loud parts and the soft parts all sound the same volume. So you don't need to worry about that either. You just need the notes to come out in the way the music director wants in the ensemble at like 75% vocal level. That's all we're shooting for. So you can adjust your rib cage breathing accordingly. While you're doing that, you're going to tell them before the show starts that you want them to learn or memorize where they breathe within their choreography. And you want them constantly pacing out those breaths and building them in every time they're running the dance. All right, now they've got the two parts together that they need, and you are going to tell them to make sure that they are always rehearsing their dance and singing it full out so they know what's going on and how to deal with things. And if they're running into difficulties, you want them to make marks in their music or in their practice journal, just like they would with any other song that they were working on. And then you want to do some cardiovascular work and then have them sing so that they can experience what it's like to try to perform with an elevated heart rate. So that would be doing jumping jacks, running in place, then going in and trying to sing the parts of the song. And this isn't going to happen immediately that they're going to magically feel better after the first show. But if they do this over the course of 3 to 4 shows, they're going to get much better at handling their respiratory management while dancing.
Awesome. Those are some really good activities that everyone can keep in mind and really good things to practice. So thanks for sharing that, Matt. Metropoli, I hope this really helps you. Write us back. Let us know how it goes. I'm going to jump on into our next question. This one comes in from Pato, who writes in, what is the best vowel modification when trying to go high and loud? And is there a set sequence to modify it?
Right. So, some of these questions come in rather long. Sorry that I forgot to cut off there, the first part of it. But yeah, the question was just could we discuss some of the strategies that you do to get extra power basically in the high notes? And so what we know is that the first thing that has to be working is the vocal folds. And registration is the term that we use to discuss the way that the vocal folds are vibrating together. because the vibration in the vocal folds produces the majority of the power that's coming out of your voice. You do resonance, which we're going to get to in a minute, super boosts it. But if the vocal folds aren't doing their job at a basic level, there's nothing to super boost. So you need to have enough buzz coming off of the vocal folds for that to happen. And buzz is different than power and is different than effort, right? I can make a really buzzy sound, without a lot of effort. I can make one with a lot of effort. That one is actually quieter than the other one, right? You have to remind your students sometimes, and I think this is more of a singer question, so Pato, I'm going to remind you that sound is produced when we move air. So as air molecules are displaced, that's where we get sound generation. If we're not moving air, we're not generating that much sound. If we move a lot of air, we generate a lot of sound, which is why cuts at your ear when you're in the room and you hear somebody do that. You're moving air really fast, and your ear responds accordingly, and it sounds loud, and you kind of get that clenching feeling when you hear that close up. So I want you to go back and watch the videos that we've done where we talk about registration. You can jump on over to our YouTube page. I know we've talked about it in the last couple weeks, and you can go through and watch those videos and find those special moments where we're talking about what to do with your mix. And I think that that's going to be really enlightening for you to make sure that that's set up and ready to go, especially when I talk about how to carry chest up into the top to add some of that extra natural power boost. But then what we're going to do is, if that's doing everything that we need, we're going to then want to start to shape the sound with our mouth. So I'm just going to kind of sustain a tone, and I'm going to start to move my mouth. And you're just going to hear a bunch of weird sounds, but I just want you to be able to notice how those movements are affecting the sound. You heard different volume levels in there as well, right? So those changes were all by the vocal tract. And I think that's more of what you're asking for with your question about vowel modification. But I feel like before we address vowel modification, we always have to make sure those vocal folds are in check, because if they're not, that's where you're going to run into trouble. So I'm going to assume that your vocal folds are in check. You've got great control. With the vowels, what I always like to do is follow the closely related vowel curve. All right, you'll see this in lots of charts. I read about it with Orrin Brown, famous vocal pedagogue. And he's got a great illustration where he shows you how the tongue height changes as you move through the different vowels, and how the mouth shape changes as well. So usually you want to kind of follow that sequence as you're trying to figure out what's going to work best for you. I like to start with an E vowel, because an E vowel has a really high tongue position and not a huge mouth opening. And that's going to keep you from pushing. Because if you try to push through an E vowel, you can't even get the note out. It requires you to relax a little bit, to figure out how to just let the voice work instead of trying to shove against it. You're going to try to master that E sound, or an E, letting your tongue be high up and letting your lips be a little bit wide. The next most closely related vowel to that is going to be A. E, A. Then you're going to start to open that vowel. When you open that vowel, you start to open your mouth a little bit, and your tongue starts to drop down. Now, after A, we're going to open up to A. So we're going from A, and then we're going to go up to A. So, A. And so as you see, it got louder and louder along the way. So I'm going to take myself down a little bit. We're going to do E, A, The more space I get in my vocal tract, the bigger megaphone I have sending sound out. So now you may be wondering, well, what do I do with an E vowel if I need power and E is supposed to be closed? That is when you modify, and you modify towards the next closest vowel. So if you're saying, I see you, we might want to go to I say. Think about an A vowel. So instead of I see you, I say you, right? And you're going to have to listen to yourself and be like, do I care that note sounds more like say instead of see? But if it's way up high at the top of your range and you want it to rock, you don't want I see. That might work. Or you could do I say you. And if the guitars are like wailing and the drums are pounding, it might sound close enough to E to work for you. Okay? That's the stuff you're going to have to figure out with your own voice. And it's hard to tell you over video, but that's where if you're working with a coach, they can really help you find that right modification. Now going down the other side, and we're going to be at ah, which is most open, and then we go down to more of an aw, like aw, isn't that a cute little baby, instead of mama, okay? So we're going ah, ah, then we bring our lips towards o, oh, and then ooh, ooh. And if you notice on that side, you'll see that the tongue does start to pull up just a little bit in the back, but it's mainly the lips that are doing the work by rounding. So from E to E, your lips are spread and your tongue's really high. Then your tongue flattens as your mouth opens, and that's how we get to ah. And then as you go towards the oo, we're going from ah, and we're bringing the lips forward and rounding them and closing them. So that's where the close related vowels are, and that's how you modify. So on the other side, we would just do the same thing. So we went from E to ah. Now we're going to go from oo to ah, the other note. So we're going to ooh, oh, ah, ah. So we're going from narrow vowels up. And once we know what that series is, we can then start to make those modifications. And you'll want to start training, like if you want to have the ability to get an E to have more of that ah quality, you want to build exercises where you switch between the two. E, ah, E, ah, E. And then in that process, you can start figuring out, well, what do I want to do? Do I maybe want to close the ah a little bit? Or do I want to open the E a little bit? Where's that sweet spot? E, ah, E, ah, E. E. So I feel my tongue arch a little bit differently for there. It's less of a closed E. I'd listen back to it, and that feels like it's giving me more power. If I like the sound of it, then that's the modification. Okay? So the key is, Pato, is make sure your vocal folds are able to adjust the registers really well. So you want to make sure that you can sing that breathy quality and that more buzzy, edgy quality and everything in between on any note within your range, except for maybe the top two and the bottom two. Those are going to be pretty hard to make a lot of adjustments on. When you know you've got that available to you, you then want to start playing around those vowels, moving from E to A to A to ah, and moving from oo to o to aw to ah. Now you have totally covered all the different vowel qualities. You sung them throughout your range. Then you can start opening up. So if you want more power on your E, move it towards a little A. If you want more power on your oo, move it towards a little bit more O. Okay? If you have an ah and you want that to have a little bit more power, you're going to have to bring some ah into it. Or if you have an ah and you want a little bit more power, you might slightly adjust it towards an ah. However, ah sometimes almost has a little bit more brightness than ah, because ah is like the hump vowel where we start to go back to warm. So you're going to want to live in between those two. And if you feel like your ah is a little bit too bright, you're going to drift down towards an aw quality. And if you think your ah wants a little bit more brightness, you can bring a little ah into it. And so follow that little curve, and I think you're going to be able to find all kinds of different modification options when you're working on a song.
Awesome. Pato, hopefully that helps you. Matt, great examples. Really love the vowel modification curve you just explained to everyone. So hope that's really helpful to everyone who's tuned in. And for all you out there watching, if you have a question, I'm going to check the chat in just a little bit, but feel free, go ahead and ask us your question if you're tuning in and you've got a question you want to know more about. So this next question comes in from Johanna. She writes in, what are the things that help to increase a deep bass?
Okay, so what I'm going to start with on here is, first of all, age. As you get older, your voice tends to drop a little bit, right? I remember I was singing just a baritone song one day, and a colleague came in and they sound, man, it sounds like I've never heard a bass sing that tenor song. And I was thinking in my head, I sounded like a tenor. And I was like, are you kidding? I'm trying to make it more tenory. And then I went and listened to the recording, and I was shocked by how dark it was, right? And so it was a song I hadn't sung for like 10 years. And I was like, wow, that's not what that used to be. Right? Because that's what happens with our bodies is over time, things change and we take on this extra depth. And even if we don't realize it, it's there. So first of all, let aging happen. Otherwise, you're doing one of two things. You're either not getting the vocal folds closed enough, or you're trying to grind the low notes out by pushing the vocal folds too close together. Okay? So you want to make sure that you are getting closure. So let's say that you know your voice type, like a tenor should have a D. Now there's some voices, and I say should, you can find 10% of the population that does not have a D who are incredible tenors. But in general, most tenors have a D. If I hear the tenor doing this, that sound makes me think they don't have enough closure. So what I would ask them to do is to sing the note I'm trying to get on ack, 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 ack. And if I get that clarity, that tells me they're just not closing those folds. If I get ack, 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 or I get ack, ack, that tells me, well, maybe they just don't have that pitch yet. And then I would do that same process with other pitches. But when I can get that ack, and I know what the bottom note is that they can ack on, I'm going to use that sound. Because eventually I want ack, 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 that much clarity, or ah, to strengthen that low note. So let's say I do find that D is a low note that they can do and they can ack on. We're going to just practice that on sustained acks. Ack, 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 ack. And we're just going to bounce around. We'll also, after we've bounced around upwards a little bit, start to bounce down. Ack, 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 ack. And then it doesn't vibrate. You know that's where you've hit the bottom. But ack, ack, that can still vibrate. So there's my low note. I know then my vocal folds can phonate. And then I know that I can get them to buzz down there. If I can do ack, 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 ma, 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 I can get the vocal folds to vibrate. I can get that note out. Okay? So that's how you test if it's a closure issue. If you hear somebody that's doing ah, 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 they're pushing together too hard. In that instance, you're going to do a blowfish. You're going to put your finger in front of their lips like this, and you're going to go. That's going to get more air flowing through those folds. You're going to take them down on blowfish. And then if I sing that quality on a no, oh, there's that quality now. Way below where I was bottoming out when I pressed. If I tried to press down there, it doesn't even come out. But with more airflow, does come out. Then the other thing of increasing the deep bass sound in your voice is a resonance thing. It depends what kind of quality that you're going for. What opera singers learn to do is hold their larynx at a neutral to slightly lowered position. To do that, you got to make sure you have good posture. So you have to be sitting up straight so that your spine is balanced in your pelvis. Then your neck connects at your thoracic vertebrae about right there, right below the hairline. If you bend over, you'll see the hump stick up in the back of the neck. You want to make sure that your neck, these cervical vertebrae in your neck, are balanced right on that little joint, and that your ears, if you were able to draw a line straight through, that right in the middle of that line is where the spine connects to the skull. And you want to make sure that your head is balanced on that point. Because when you're balanced on this point, your larynx is going to be nice and open, and it's going to drop a little bit more naturally. If you notice now that I'm sitting this way, my voice has already taken on more depth. So if you want to warm up the tone, we want to get our larynx in this position. Then when we drop our jaw, we want to remember that the jaw it does have a hinge, but it also glides. We don't want to pull our jaw back, but instead we want to let this little joint that's there relax, because you have muscles that'll clench that jaw joint. You want to relax it and allow the jaw to drop forward, because when the jaw drops forward, it opens up the space behind the hump of the tongue, right? And you again hear another level of depth that comes in when I do this. Then I can use my lips. And if I have my lips back like this, it's going to give me a brighter sound. And if I have my lips neutral, it's going to give me more warmth. And the more I bring them forward, the more warmth I get. So if I want to bring in the bass down here, la, let's wash down that summer allergy. Lots of dry grass allergies. We're going nuts right now. That's where you get the depth. La Calunia has that extra warmth inside it. So that's a little bit too woofy for me. I don't love it that woofy. So if I don't want it that woofy, I'm going to let my larynx come up and be a little bit more neutral instead of trying to hold it down. And that will give me a little bit more brightness, but I can still maintain some of the warmth with the vowel quality. La Calunia Infenti I can get that bass quality by keeping some of that back without having to depress the larynx. Okay? If you don't want to go that far and get operatic, cool. Take it and use a minimal amount of that adjustment. So instead of going to 100% of that adjustment, just drop it down. Right? You hear lots of people. This is Johnny Cash, right? I hear that train rolling, it's rolling around the bend. And I ain't seen a sunset since I don't know when. It's just kind of doing the same thing, but in moderation. And so you just got to then kind of play and find you. But if you watch the show enough, you'll know that I have a philosophy that I find that people get the quickest changes when they explore the complete opposite of what they're doing and then try to find the middle ground instead of just trying to nudge our way up to that thing. Okay? So go try that. Make sure your posture is aligned. Make sure that your jaw is dropping and moving slightly forward, and you're releasing air to get that warm, rich, deep bass quality. And if you want any, come on and send us a video or anything, I'm also happy to listen to it. And after you've made some of these adjustments and give you some additional feedback. All right. So thanks for sending in the question.
Awesome. Okay, Johanna, we hope that helps you. Let's jump into our last question that we have here today. This one comes in from Rana. When a male voice gets into the passaggio zone, how high or up to what note can they extend the twangy sound?
Yeah. So this was a longer version of the question. This is a voice teacher writing it. So voice teachers out there, we love voice teacher questions. We always love to share. Mike and I are the philosophy of evidence-based voice pedagogy, where we use, what we know to be from science, facts, about how the voice works, like the vocal folds close and buzz, and use that information to do the training. But we always love the pedagogical chat because there's lots of ways to do any of the things that we talk about on the show. So feel free to chime in if you're watching. So she was specifically talking about like when a singer wants to carry their chest voice up above the traditional passaggio and doing what she would call a belt. And she mentions in there that there are people who say that men can't belt. This is one of those terminology discussions that I just don't like to get into the weeds on, because at the end of the day, if it's a sound that's marketable and hireable, you can call it zucchini and I'm cool with it. Right? If it's making the sound that gets the person a job, I literally don't care what you call it. And our students don't either if they can make the sound. So Rana, if you think it's a man belt, say it. I call it a belt, right? To me, a belt is a highly intense emotional moment in a song where the voice takes on a call-like quality with a high energy emotional state of being, right? And it doesn't sound classical. Right? So if I'm doing, that sounds classical. It can be a high emotional state of being. That's not a belt. But I go, no! And it's got that more bright, brassy or rock quality. That's a belt to me. It's chest dominant, bright vowels, high energy emotional states of being, doesn't sound classical. And it has a lot of a call quality inside of it. I don't usually call, hey, to friends across the street. So, while that's also a classical sound, it's also not a true calling quality. So, if that's what we're going to first try to do, actually, Rana, is I would say that to get the student calling. So, you have them just call out the name of their best friend. So you'd say, hey, Steve, and get them calling out. Now, if they go, hey, Steve, you then use distance with them and say, yeah, you just called out to Steve and he's like 7 to 10 foot away. I need you to call out to Steve when he's 30 foot away. And then keep increasing the distance until you get the student to engage. Now, be careful. Right? You're not going to get 100 decibels out of a 15-year-old in most cases. Okay? There are exceptions, but not most. So, you're going to also have to kind of temper that with their age. And remember, if they're trying to belt, they're either in a musical or in a kind of a pop rock setting where they've got a microphone. So it only needs to be strong enough for the mic anyway. And as you get them going and calling out, Steve, Steve, tell them to maybe increase it like you're really excited. Hey, Steve! And then see where their pitch goes. You're going to be quietly over there trying to find where they are on the keyboard. Figure out what they're going up to, okay? Because that tells you their primal instinct is what we call it. Their ability to call, that's primal. It's within us. Nobody has to teach you how to do that. You just know how to do it. So their primal voice is capable of going up to a G, which means we should get the singing voice up to at least an F, okay? So you're going to want to see where that place is. And then we're going to usually want to try to use that same calling sound. Hey, Steve. Right? So that we get that same idea. They were doing, hey, Steve. Hey, Steve. Hey, Steve. And then they would keep taking it up. Now, in my voice, an E doesn't work very well. So I would have to come up with a different thing to call out. So I might say, or please stay away. Please stay away. Please stay away. Pitching the voice up like that. And that becomes the exercise. There you go. Please stay away. Please stay away. Please stay away. And you take them up with that vowel. So you're just going to keep alternating between that primal call, and then you're going to go into putting it onto pitch. That twangy sound is going to go up to different high notes depending on the voice. A tenor should easily be able to take some quality like that up to a solid A. And if they're a true tenor, they're going to have that quality on a B flat, a B, and a C as well, and maybe even higher. If they're a baritone, I get excited when the G is there, and I try to get the A flat and A there. Depends on age. I got a 28 year old baritone right now who's out doing a gig, and he's got a solid B flat and B, but he knows he's a baritone and he tries not to use those notes unless he has to. But, what my thought is that if my, older, more mature voice baritones know that they have a B, then they're not afraid of the G anymore, right? So the B is there for them to learn how to navigate the range, but not for them to necessarily put in front of the paying public on a regular basis. If you're working with a bass, you maybe get lucky just to get up to F's or G's. So take it to wherever they're capable of going. Then if you're really getting into a bind and you're finding that those vowel qualities and calling things aren't enough, that's when you're going to have to go in and start working on the registration. If they're carrying up too much chest into the passaggio, it's going to get real splatty. So I'll do one here on please stay away. Please stay away. It's real yelly. That's way too much chest. Gave me a tickle cough because it's so much chest. You don't want that. So we want to, in those instances, we're going to have to realign those vocal folds. And that's where I like to use glides, where you start the glide on a heavier register and then you have them lighten up. I usually do over the course of a fifth. So then, figuring out how light they can get up there so that then when we put those back into the words, please stay away, they know how to lighten up. Okay? And they need a full warm up before doing that instead of eating pasta and garlic toast and then trying to do it. I'm noticing that wasn't a great strategy before the show tonight, but it was really good. But, you want to be fully warmed up before you try doing those. But doing that glide that lightens up as you go up and then comes back down is going to make sure the vocal folds are doing the right thing as well. So that then when you go over to the primal calling, if they are shouting in, same, soften it up a little bit, lighten it up a little bit, or give it more. Right? And a lot of this is what gets into nudging the bowl, right? And so you're just trying to take this sound. Like if you want to get a bowl out of a china shop, you're going to nudge it. You're not just going to kick it in the butt. All right? There are a lot of times I like to kick a bowl in the butt and be like, do this, boom, like going to the opposite sound quality to then try to then find what works for them. But this is one of the nudging the bowl moments where you've got the voice about ready to go and they're getting frustrated and you don't want them losing it and taking everything out in the way. So you just want to be like, yeah, that's good. What happens if we make it a little brighter? Awesome. Can you make it warmer? Great. And you just get them thinking they're just trying to play around with variations. And then when they make the right one, you go, that one right there. Do that one again. That's the one. Keep doing that. And anytime you get a success, repeat it 5 to 8 times. Because if they can repeat it 5 to 8 times, their brain's going to remember that one. All right. And so, do those 5 to 8 times and then change pitch and then work them around. And through that process, they should start to get more and more accessibility to those different vocal qualities in that part of your range. And you should be able to take them to where you want them to go.
Awesome. What a great breakdown. So, Ron, hopefully that helps you understand how to approach that and where you can extend your twangy sound to. Let me check the chat real quick, Matt, see if we've got...
Hi, Christy.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Christy, thanks for tuning in. Welcome. All right. So, well, hey, guys, you got any questions for us? Type them in. If we miss your question this week, we'll grab it next week. But But note to self: garlic toast before show. Maybe
Oh, I
not
sat down and I realized,
way to warm up.
good thing we're not in person. That's all I can say.
All
So there
right.
is some truth to, if you're watching, because of garlic, yes. But if you are watching the show and you're a singer, this is why we say what you eat matters. I didn't think that one out with the questions tonight that I might demo a little bit. So I just ate what I wanted to eat. Had I done that before a performance, it would have been a rough one. So yes, what you eat does affect your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in. Write us with your questions. We look forward to doing these shows every week. So we're back in it. All right, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.